The room was built to be admired, not lived in. A long marble table ran the length of the dining hall, so polished it mirrored the chandeliers overhead, each light casting reflections sharp enough to slice through the conversation. Gold trim curled delicately around the plates, the cutlery weighted and cold. Everything gleamed with inherited precision. So did Han Jiwan. He entered late, as always. The hush that followed his arrival wasn't respect, it was expectation. A chair scraped back, a jacket was slipped off one shoulder, and every eye seemed to align itself to him as if by magnetic pull. Father turned slightly in his seat. The legal advisor at the far end smiled, as if anticipating a performance. Jiwon didn't bow. He didn't have to. His presence was acknowledgement enough. I sat to the left of our father, 2 seats down from Jiwon's usual spot. My place was always beside the window. Never in the photographs, never directly in the family's center frame. The late afternoon sunlight through the glass framed my hair in gold, but no one looked my way. "Soshio," Father said, glancing toward me. "Still so quiet. That's a good temperament." I bowed my head, the corners of my lips lifting slightly. It was all he needed, all I was allowed. Good temperament means don't speak unless spoken to. It means don't object even when something's taken from you, and something always is. Jiwoon pulled out his chair with one hand and with the other casually placed my phone in the middle of the table like a party trick. "I've taken your allowance again," he said smoothly. "Family money, right?" A beat of silence. Then laughter. From the uncles, from the cousins, even Father allowed himself a low chuckle. "You don't need it. What would you even spend it on?" Jiwon's voice was syrupy with charm, the kind that covers rot so gracefully it makes you question your own boundaries. My fingers curled around the chopsticks in front of me. They remained unbroken. Jiwon's hand lingered on my phone a moment too long, thumb brushing its screen before sliding it toward me with mock courtesy. "You should be flattered. I wouldn't take it if I didn't think you'd let me." I didn't answer. My voice had sunk so far into me over the years, I wasn't even sure how to retrieve it anymore. The laughter faded into the clinking of wine glasses and the rustle of tailored sleeves. Jiwoon leaned back, folding his arms behind his head in full ease. His cufflinks caught the light. He's always been dressed for applause. He wore a navy double-breasted suit, cuffed clean at the wrist, shoes polished to the color of secrets. Everything about him was sharp and sure, from the slope of his shoulders to the way he used people's expectations like elevator buttons, always rising, never asking. I turned my attention back to the bowl in front of me. The miso soup had gone lukewarm, steam long since vanished. I hadn't touched a single thing on my plate. Never did when he was there. From across the table, my cousin leaned in toward his mother and whispered something, a sideways glance tossed in my direction. They laughed beneath their breaths. I caught the reflection of their smile in the spoon. They don't even see me. They see what they expect, the quiet one, the harmless one. But silence is not surrender, not anymore. "Jiwoon," Father began, "how did the shareholders respond to last week's pitch?" My brother straightened with a practiced smile. They approved. Full margin expansion on the 3rd quarter. We're adjusting port logistics in Busan to match. "Excellent," Father said. "That's my boy." There it was again. My boy, said with pride, possession, permanence. He'd never called me that, not even close. I remember being 12, standing beside Jiwoon at a shareholders' retreat. He was 17, already in a blazer too expensive to wrinkle. A man I didn't recognize had asked, "Is this your sister?" Father had answered without hesitation, "She's from my 2nd marriage. She's good at reading." The man had nodded politely and moved on. Jiwoon had smirked. I'd said nothing then, either. Back in the present, a server cleared my untouched plate. Another was laid before me. Steamed snapper glazed in plum. The scent drifted up gently. I kept my eyes forward. My wallet, tucked beside my hip under the table, hadn't moved in days. It was the same one I'd carried since university, a faded cream leather fold with a tiny gold clasp, gifted by my mother before she passed. Inside it was my ID, 3 unused gift cards, and the knowledge that my personal account had been quietly drained again. He doesn't ask anymore, he assumes. and they all let him. The conversation swelled again. Ji-woon described a dinner party in Cheongdam, how the investors there had been impressed by the way I handled the advisory hiccup. I knew the hiccup he meant. It was a clause he hadn't read. I'd mentioned it in a memo weeks ago. No one had credited it to me. I shifted in my seat. My hand moved toward the chopsticks, then stopped. Yoon caught the movement and smiled. "You're not eating, Sojun. Are you finally on one of those water cleanses?" There it was again, the taunt dressed as banter, the spotlight disguised as interest. He didn't expect a reply. Neither did anyone else. I picked up the chopsticks, slowly this time, positioned them in my hands, still unbroken, still unused. Then I looked up and held his gaze for the first time that evening. Not long, barely a breath, but long enough for him to notice something had changed. That something behind my eyes wasn't shrinking anymore. He tilted his head, bemused. I lowered my gaze before anyone else caught it, broke the chopsticks cleanly in two, and began to eat. The first time I took my seat in the boardroom, no one told me where to sit. They were already in the middle of a discussion about overseas logistics, voices layered like fog over glass. Polished oak gleamed under warm, deliberate lighting. A mahogany nameplate read Han Jwoon, Vice Chair, in raised silver. Across from it, 3 empty chairs. I chose the farthest. No one looked up. I placed my notebook on the table's edge, the corner of a finance textbook sticking out beneath it. A single page was folded at the top. Clause 14C. My eyes flicked toward it every so often, like checking the pulse of something no one else had noticed was alive. They don't see me here, not really, but I do. I see everything they forget to hide. Ji-woon stood at the front, sleeves rolled up, dress shirt pristine white against the blackboard behind him. He'd drawn diagrams in smooth, confident strokes. Logistics branches, market risk. He was using terms I'd seen him Google 2 nights ago on the shared server. His voice had rhythm, charm, and practiced spontaneity. Even his pauses were calculated. Margin flexibility doesn't mean operational softness, he said. It's about fluid control. We restructure the import batch sequencing, not the supplier integrity. That's the difference. He didn't look at me, but I felt the weight of his awareness. He always knew when I was in the room. That didn't mean he ever acknowledged it. An older board member nodded along, writing something carefully. I leaned forward, slowly, and tapped open the printed agenda beneath my hand. Line 17, Audit Trail Consolidation. Why is that pushed to Q4? It's always in Q2. I glanced up again. Ji-woon was smiling at a joke someone had made. One of the interns laughed too eagerly. He flashed his dimples, winked, and carried on. When the meeting ended, papers rustled like autumn leaves. Chairs scraped, heels clicked. No one lingered near me. Not with hostility, just with inertia. I waited until everyone had gone, then stood, walking slowly to Ji-woon's abandoned chair. It was still warm. The screen was open. He hadn't logged out. He never logs out when he's winning. I scrolled through the trust operations panel. Access was limited, but the overview was there. 4 trustees listed by legal order. One line read, Emergency Controls, see Clause 14C. I clicked it. A prompt appeared. Restricted, code required. I didn't try to answer one. Not yet. I slid the document into my notes instead, and returned to my chair, quietly folding the page corner. The finance department at university was fluorescent and brutal. Everything was sharp, numbers, deadlines, disappointment. I was rarely called on in lectures, even when my hand was raised. Professors knew who I was, they just didn't expect me to need the answers. Most chaebol daughters came to class for attendance. I came for the gaps between lines. Late one evening, I sat alone in the library, scanning through regulatory case files on fiduciary breach. A soft sound, the chime of an email, echoed through the silence. From CO Legal Team. Subject: Trust Access Annual Review. Body: Attach Standard Clause Inventory Inactive Protocols. A PDF blinked open. There it was. Clause 14C. Emergency Financial Control Adjustment. My breath caught. The trigger condition was clear. If any active trustee were investigated for misuse or fund diversion, control would be temporarily reassigned to the lowest liquidity co-trustee for stabilization. That would be me. At the time, it felt like holding a lit match in a room no one realized was full of gas. Back in the boardroom 2 weeks later, Ji-woon was presenting again. This time he was talking about diversifying into entertainment logistics. I knew he didn't believe a word of it. He hated the entertainment sector. Too unpredictable, too loud. But the investor behind the idea was his university friend, Jae Hwan, who had recently started a shell firm in Songdo. He's not doing this for the company. I watched him tap through slides, smile with an edge too polished, speak like he'd already won. By redirecting dormant allocations into startup-facing logistics, he explained, we reduce friction across the secondary fund branches. This is a future-proof move, risk-adjusted. The term sounded heavy. He liked those. Words that gave the illusion of math behind ambition. I lowered my gaze to the packet on my desk. Page 7, line item C, Fund Diversion Request, JH Incorporated. I knew that name. Jae-won. Later that evening, in the hallway outside the elevator, I overheard Ji-woon lapping into his phone. Doesn't matter, it's still under discretionary flow. No one reads past the first clause anyway, especially not her. I stepped into the shadows behind a column, listening. He laughed again. If they audit it, we spin it as an expansion trial. Worst case, we slow it down next quarter. He always talked about me like I was an afterthought, wearing shoes. He doesn't know what I read. He doesn't even know what I kept. I returned to my dorm that night and spread every legal document across my bed. I traced the flow of approvals, every transfer he'd initiated, every ghost account I could tie to his name. It wasn't illegal yet, but it was loud enough to trigger a clause. And that was all it needed. 1 week later, I visited the hospital for a routine check on father's medication coverage. The nurse met me at the elevator. Your father's in ICU. It happened this morning. A stroke. I stood there, her words draining the oxygen from the corridor. Inside the ICU room, everything was sterile and slow. Machines blinked, a rhythmic hiss. His hand was pale, wires curling from the wrist like roots. I pulled up a chair beside the bed, my back straight, hands folded in my lap. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my folder. The trigger request was already filled in. Clause 14C. All it needed was submission. They gave him the empire because he looked the part. I didn't need to look the part. I needed to know. The ICU was colder on the second day. Not physically, the temperature hadn't changed, but something in the air had. Less movement, less hope. The nurses didn't linger as they passed. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary. Machines hummed with clinical indifference. My father's chest rose and fell beneath a light blanket, his mouth slack, eyelids twitching faintly beneath closed lids. The stroke had taken away his ability to speak, and with it, the only voice in this family that could have still pretended to hold things together. I sat beside him, still in the same chair I had used the night before, the folder open across my lap. Inside, the emergency form was waiting. Clause 14C, printed on the top in bold serif font. My pen rested against the signature line. A digital tablet blinked quietly beside it. A soft knock at the glass wall behind me drew my gaze. The family's legal liaison stood in the hallway, eyes low, fingers laced in front of his belt. I stood, opened the door without a word, and handed him the form. He took it, checked the fields, and looked up at me. You understand what this does? I nodded. The transition will take place within the hour, he said. I didn't answer. He always said I was good at waiting. He never asked what I was waiting for. 1 hour later, on an island far from the hospital, Han Ji-woon was sitting in the dim warmth of a luxury seafood lounge, overlooking the Jeju coast. He was dressed in a lightweight, tailored blazer open at the collar, his Rolex catching the firelight from a nearby torch stand. The ocean lapped in the distance, rhythmic and distant. His companions were 2 investors from Shanghai and 1 from MacLab, men who liked flash, who respected control, who equated money with muscle. The server set down the bill. Jiwon didn't look at the number. He never did. He reached for his gold card and handed it over with a soft smirk. The waiter bowed slightly, then stepped back toward the terminal. A few seconds passed. Then came a flicker of confusion. A few more beeps. Then silence. Jiwon raised his eyebrows in amused curiosity. Everything all right? The waiter hesitated. It appears the card has declined. The pause in the air was like a snapped string on a violin. The table grew still. One of the investors raised an eyebrow. Jiwon frowned and gestured toward the machine. Try again. The waiter did. The machine blinked again, then flashed red. This time, a paper receipt spilled from the slot and landed against the edge of the table. Small, innocent, final. Jiwon stared at it, then reached for his phone, dialing the private line for the family's trust banking liaison. His tone was crisp. This is Han, Jiwon. There seems to be an issue with my card. I'm currently dining in Jeju and... The voice on the other end interrupted gently. Yes, Mr. Han, we're aware. There's been a recent update to the authority structure. Jiwon's smile flickered. What kind of update? A shift in emergency control protocol, Clause 14C, has been activated. His jaw tightened. I need the name of the current controller. There was a pause. Then came the response, clean, neutral, impossible. The current debit authority holder is Min So-hyun. My phone was silent. I sat on the edge of the hospital terrace, coat drawn over my knees, the sky above me turning the color of deep stone. My hands were folded, fingertips pressed together like I was praying. He didn't call me. He wouldn't. I imagined the moment, the blink in his expression when he heard my name, that second of confusion turning to disbelief, then something colder. A shift. He would feel it not as punishment, but as violation. Because he never imagined I was capable of disruption. He never imagined I even knew where the wires were, let alone how to cut them. I looked down at my tablet. The trust interface had updated. A blinking blue icon flashed beside my name. Authority. Miss So-hyun. Temporary protocol. Below that, debit permissions, spending thresholds, flag conditions. The same spreadsheet Jiwon had used freely for years now lived beneath my fingertips. I scrolled down, inspecting the matrix. Every access point, every transfer, every auto payment. He'd set his accounts to operate like a king's treasury. Open, unregulated, unquestioned. I began to flag categories. Luxury travel under review. Unverified corporate transfer. Temporarily suspended. Offshore linked discretionary fund. Frozen, pending audit. Each line responded with a soft beep, like switches being turned off in the dark. Back in Jeju, Jiwon stepped away from the table, his phone still against his ear. He didn't notice the investors whispering. He didn't care that one of them was already checking his own portfolio. He hung up without another word. His eyes were unfocused now. Not panicked, not angry, just calculating. She couldn't. She doesn't even know how this works, does she? He opened the banking app. A message appeared at the top of the screen. Card suspended, contact controller for verification. And below it, controller, M. So-hyun. I returned to my father's room that night and stood at the foot of his bed. His breathing was slower than before. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside him. I submitted the clause, I said softly, though he couldn't hear me. It's done. I watched his chest rise and fall. Your golden son couldn't pay for dinner? The words shouldn't have tasted like anything, but somehow they did. I sat down beside the bed again and opened the terminal once more. The approval queue had updated. I now had control over Jiwon's corporate cards, trust-based accounts, and daily debit flow. At the bottom of the screen, a notification was waiting. Statement alert, failed transaction, Jeju Island, 1,400,000. Recipient, Han Jiwon. Status, declined. Handled by, Trust Controller M. So-hyun. I exhaled, but in triumph. Not even in relief. Only in confirmation. The floor outside the trust office was polished to a mirror sheen. My reflection followed every step I took as I entered the marble corridor. not as an intruder, but as someone the building no longer ignored. Inside, the office was warm, with low morning light. The blinds were tilted halfway open, catching streaks of gold against the glass wall. A faint hum came from the trust terminal as it processed batch revisions queued overnight. I was seated at the console, coat still draped neatly over the back of the chair, hair tied in a low, disciplined knot. The cursor blinked beside a flagged expense entry. Line 3028, Han Ji-woon, 8,100,000, rejected. I watched the cell glow briefly. Green, then yellow, then red. It never blinked like that when he was in control. The door slammed open. Ji-woon entered like a gust pressed into a tailored frame. No knock, no formality, just anger tucked into every wrinkle-free fold of his charcoal suit. "You activated an emergency clause without speaking to me," he said, voice clipped. "I didn't need to," I replied without turning. "It wasn't yours to approve." His shoes clicked against the stone floor as he approached, the tension in his shoulders simmering under fabric that fit too perfectly. "This is not how this works, Seo-hyun." His tone wrapped around my name like a warning, like I'd borrowed something fragile and overstayed my touch. I closed the spreadsheet, slowly rotated in my chair, and finally looked at him. He hadn't shaved, not completely. A shadow along his jaw betrayed the night he probably didn't sleep. His tie was loosened by a half-inch, and his fingers clenched once before landing flat on the table between us. "I know you think you're proving something," he continued, "but this is far more complex than a spreadsheet. The trust isn't some personal game you can win with numbers." I tilted my head slightly. It was always numbers. You were simply used to no one reading them. His breath caught. Then came the condescension, like perfume he couldn't help but wear. "You're not trained for this. You studied it, but that's not the same as running a live matrix." "I never said I was running it," I said. "I'm managing it. Very different discipline." He laughed, a short, hollow sound. "Managing, you froze international transfers, you capped my access, you flagged every major card in the trust." I reached forward, tapped the tablet again. The display changed. Transaction logs bloomed across the screen, neat rows highlighting spending categories and breach thresholds. "Each of these crossed discretionary thresholds," I explained. "Clause 14C gives me the right to audit every trustee under active investigation, even if informally. That includes daily caps, itemization protocols, and manual verification for high-cost purchases." I paused, letting the last line settle between us like a curtain slowly falling. "I haven't stopped you, Juzun. I've only asked for receipts." He stepped back, arms folding. The smirk was gone now. He looked like he was still trying to play a role he no longer believed in. "What do you even want?" he asked. "To humiliate me?" That made me smile, but only slightly. "The first one I allowed since this began. You think humiliation is measured in how loud I speak? Then you still don't understand me." I stood. The chair rolled back a few inches. From this angle, the morning light cast his face in half shadow. "I don't want to ruin you," I said, stepping around the desk. "I'm here to itemize you." His expression tightened. "You don't need all access control to represent this family," I continued. "You need accountability. And right now, the system is finally requesting some." He looked at the monitor again. The spreadsheet was still open in the background. Cell 328 blinking red. "You froze a yacht deposit," he said quietly, like saying it out loud made it more absurd. That entry lacked supporting documentation and exceeded flagged limits. It was a strategic gift for a partner in Busan. Then it should have had a paper trail. "You think this is going to last?" His voice was colder now, but not cruel, nervous. "You think they'll let you keep this after the year's over?" I met his eyes. "Why do you think I'm counting?" Later that day, alone again in the office, I returned to the audit log. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, calm. The cursor blinked beside Ji-woon's newly updated limits. Luxury expenditures capped 3 million/mo. Single transaction review threshold, 500,000. Corporate gift categories, suspended pending revision. Each value appeared in a quiet line of order. I watched as the system auto-flagged another entry, A pending transfer to an entertainment brokerage. The cell turned yellow. I clicked pause. The room felt still again, like before a storm or just after one, the moment you realize the silence is not absence, but control. Across the terminal's surface, a new prompt appeared. Upcoming account review, Han Ji-woon, next evaluation, 7 days. Controller, Meso-hyun. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded across my lap. He would come back. He would ask again. Louder, maybe. Angrier. But he would have to speak in the language of reason now, not assumption. And for the first time, I would be the one holding the ledger. The boardroom smelled faintly of polished wood and quiet tension. The long oval table had already been set with bottled water, embossed leather folders, and neat nameplates in brushed steel. Outside the windows, Seoul's skyline shimmered in hazy morning light, glass towers stacked like frozen applause. I sat at the far end, beside the legal counsel, my reports aligned in perfect rows before me. Each page, signed, footnoted, and bound under a navy cover. My initials, MSH, stood in silver foil on every front sheet. Across the room, Ji-woon hadn't yet taken his seat. He stood at the window instead, arms folded behind his back, eyes locked somewhere far below. From this angle, he looked like a sculpture of himself. Still handsome, still composed, but hollow in the center. He hadn't spoken to me since the day in the trust office. That silence stretched through the halls of the company, through breakfast meetings and hallway run-ins, and now it hung between us like a pane of glass no one wanted to acknowledge. A door clicked open. "Let's begin," said Director O, tapping the table gently as he sat. One by one, the chairs filled. Board members shuffled documents, cleared throats, powered up their tablets. Then came the first item on the agenda. "Uncontrolled expenditure review," read the assistant. Ji-woon turned from the window. His walk to the chair was slower than usual, less theatrical, still rehearsed, but heavy now, not deliberate. "Mr. Han," said Director O, "you've submitted your spending memo for last quarter." There was a faint pause before he answered. "Yes, submitted to Trust Controller Min Seo-hyun 3 days ago. Final edits included." He said it without looking at me. The words landed like pebbles in still water, causing ripples. A few board members glanced toward me. I nodded once, already opening my binder. "We flagged 3 entries exceeding the threshold for discretionary classification," I said, turning the report to face them. 2 were travel, 1 was a vehicle lease miscategorized as promotional. All have been returned for clarification. Director O raised an eyebrow. "A vehicle lease?" he asked. "Was that the 92 million one-yacht retainer?" I didn't look up. "Yes, sir. Labeled under Strategic Partnership Development, lacking substantiating contract." A cough disguised laughter at the far end. Ji-woon's hand, resting beside his water glass, twitched slightly. I noticed it, the way a pianist flinches when the wrong key is struck. One of the older board members leaned back, a smile in his voice. "Well, she's got the firm running tighter than you ever did, Ji-woon." Laughter this time, unfiltered and light, not malicious, but amused, like a private joke someone had dared to say aloud. Ji-woon's jaw moved, but no words came out. He reached for the water glass, lifted it. A tremor passed through the clear liquid before he took a drink. His cufflink glinted once. Gold, shaped like a knot. I'd seen him wear it in high school during mock trials. When he was being groomed for the role everyone already believed was him. That version of him would have answered with charm. Redirected, diffused. This version, new deflection, had finally met a locked door. "Any additional feedback?" he asked, voice calm but edged. Attorney Beck, seated beside me, opened a supplementary file. "All trust interventions have been executed under Clause 1415. Temporary authority transfer remains valid until term expiration or revocation through full trustee consensus." He paused, then looked directly at Ji-woon. "As of today, no such consensus exists." Silence again. And then, for the first time in this room, someone turned to me. Ms. Min, said Director O, any recommendation for adjusting discretionary thresholds going forward? I turned a page slowly, felt the weight of every eye settle not with skepticism, but curiosity. We're currently reviewing recurring anomalies in approval routing, I said. Some departments are routing through outdated proxy structures. I'll propose an updated approval map by end of week, if agreeable. Director O nodded. Excellent. The meeting moved on. But Ji-woon never quite returned to his old posture. He shifted, leaned forward, took fewer notes. And when the projector dimmed for the quarterly overview, I caught a glimpse of him in the darkened reflection of the screen. He was watching me. On a challenge. Not in dismissal, but like a man trying to remember where the cracks had started. After the meeting, I gathered my files into a neat stack and rose quietly. I could hear murmurs outside the room, assistants discussing lunch orders, legal interns updating schedules, normal rhythms. I stepped into the hallway and walked toward the elevator. A few seconds later, footsteps echoed behind me. He didn't call my name, he never did. I stopped without turning. What do you think this ends with? His voice was behind me, low and tired. I faced him. It doesn't end, I said softly. It recalibrates. He exhaled sharply through his nose. Frustration. Recognition. I gave you everything I had, he said, and assumed I'd never ask what was mine. The elevator chimed open behind me. I stepped inside. He didn't follow. As the doors began to close, I watched his expression. The tension, the resignation, the flicker of something he wouldn't say. Not yet. The last thing I saw was the glass wall reflecting him back to himself. And in his own reflection, for once he looked unsure. The luncheon was held in a mirrored ballroom atop the Seo Finance Tower. Glass walls stretched to the skyline, the Han River glinting far below in curved ribbons of silver. Crisp linen covered every table. Tulips, arranged in clean vertical lines, stood like silent witnesses between rows of cutlery. The kind of setting where everything looked perfect, until someone breathed too deeply and broke the surface tension. I arrived early, not because I wanted to be seen, but because I wanted to see them first. Cameras were already being set up along the east wall. Two financial correspondents chatted softly while adjusting their lapels. Behind them, the screen displayed the firm's quarterly growth chart, an elegant green curve bending upward. It wasn't deception, it was real, but that upward arc had nothing to do with Ji-woon. And today, that difference was about to be made public. I made my way to the table closest to the stage. The seat wasn't labeled. Still, no one asked me to move. Across the room, Ji-woon stepped in 10 minutes late. A tailored navy jacket hugged his frame, darker than his usual tones, as though he'd tried to dress gravity onto himself. His tie was silk. His cufflinks were changed. Today, they bore the family crest. He moved like a man still convinced of his centrality. A few reporters turned their heads. The camera flashes began, gentle and spaced, like distant lightning. His smile was there, but something in it had lost rhythm. I didn't stand. He saw me, held my gaze for a second too long, then turned away. The luncheon opened with formal introductions. Numbers, applause. The spokesperson from Internal Strategy mentioned cost-cutting efficiencies. Then came the press Q&A. Polite at first, and Mr. Han, a reporter called out from the third row. Recent adjustments in discretionary fund flow, who's authorizing them? There's been a clear shift in trust-controlled expense behavior. Ji-woon paused. He hadn't expected that to come this early. He wet his lips once, then leaned toward the mic. There's been a temporary transition, he said carefully. Part of a family oversight process, nothing out of the ordinary. A ripple passed through the press pool. The reporter flipped a page in her binder. So, the trust controller isn't you right now. Silence pooled like spilled ink. He blinked. It's family oversight, he said again, a little softer. Temporary. Across from him, legal counsel turned subtly toward me. I leaned in, voice low. He didn't even read the clause, I said. The words didn't reach him, but they didn't need to. The press had started to murmur. Another reporter raised his hand. Was this clause triggered due to any internal concerns or mismanagement? Before he could answer, a soft flash lit the room. A camera shutter snapped, timed perfectly to capture Jiwoon's face in stillness, his jaw tight, his eyes unfocused, his posture caught between defense and disbelief. A screen behind the dais flickered once. A projection of the trust's governance clause appeared, highlighted. Clause 14 Safe 5 Safe Emergency Financial Control Adjustment. Trigger condition, misuse, investigation, or breach under trustee authorization. It wasn't subtle. Someone in the room had come prepared. Jiwoon leaned into the microphone, voice lower now. All processes are being reviewed internally. I have full confidence in the current acting controller. His hand reached for the water glass beside him, lifted it, trembled faintly, and returned it without drinking. A single sheet of paper slid across the table toward me. Relabeled, Audit Results. I opened it, scanning the summary. Millions saved in suspended vanity projects, vendor redirection, double billing removal, and offshore transfer halts. The weight of my signature was at the bottom, not just as temporary trustee, as recommended permanent oversight. After the luncheon, I stood at the edge of the corridor outside the ballroom. Staff hurried past with trays, conversations blurred behind closed doors. I didn't follow him immediately. I waited until the crowd began to thin. When I stepped into the corridor, Jiwoon was already there, his jacket folded over his arm, tie loosened. He wasn't angry. He was still, or too still. I didn't think it would go that far, he said without turning. That's the problem, I answered. You never thought far enough. He faced me then. His voice was quieter, like he didn't want the walls to hear him. I built this company's public image. I carried expectations you've never even touched. I met his gaze without hesitation. And I carried consequences you never bothered to see. He looked away. The silence between us stretched again, not with tension, but with the ache of mutual knowing. He knew I wouldn't reverse what had happened. And I knew he wouldn't ask me to. I suppose they'll name you controller permanently. Ever sell again, I replied. But she didn't stop it either. My eyes fell to the red folder in my hands. Then, back to him. I wasn't waiting to be chosen, Jiwoon. I was making sure I had something worth choosing. A long pause. His hand tightened slightly on the folded jacket. Tell me, he asked finally, did you hate me all these years? No, I said, voice soft. I hated who you thought I was. Before he could respond, the door at the end of the hall opened. A young assistant called his name. He hesitated, then nodded once and walked away, footsteps fading into marble. I stood alone with the audit report pressed to my chest, ink still fresh, authority still pending. But this time, it wasn't about waiting anymore. The morning the clause expired, the air inside the trust office was unnervingly quiet. Even the automated door closed softer than usual behind me, as if the building itself had sensed the shift. The system alert was already waiting, hovering in the center of the terminal like a held breath. Clause 14, Temporary Authority, expired. Default status, pending reversion. Prompt, return control to original trustee. The screen blinked, soft blue, on white. For a moment, I stared at it. Not because I didn't know the answer, because I knew it would matter. I reached for the stylus, my fingers were steady, there was no hesitation when I selected Decline Transfer, Proceed with Oversight Proposal. The next screen appeared, lines of text unfolding across the interface like clockwork. The draft I had prepared 3 months earlier, already reviewed by legal, time-stamped in the audit archive. Waited to be ratified. Proposed charter, permanent governance oversight model for high-value debit distribution. Filed under Memseuhyun. This time, I wasn't acting under emergency protocol. This time, it would carry my name. The board meeting that afternoon was smaller than usual. Only the core trustees, legal counsel, and 2 internal auditors. The glass room echoed faintly with the click of chairs being pulled back, the low shuffle of papers being arranged. I laid my charter on the center table. 46 pages, stamped and bound in matte black. My name was on the cover, not as an author, but as an implementer. Ji-woon walked in 2 minutes late, gaze sharp and unreadable. He wore gray this time, darker than his usual palette. His tie was knotted tight like a noose he had convinced himself was armor. I didn't rise. He glanced at the folder, at the tab labeled Permanent Oversight, then back to me. "You're really doing this," he said softly. I didn't answer him. I spoke to the room. "The clause has lapsed," I began. "As of this morning, standard control pathways may be restored unless alternative governance is approved." Director O adjusted his glasses. "And you're proposing an alternative?" "Yes," I said. "A permanent one. Debit flow should never again hinge on assumed hierarchy or outdated proxy rights. This charter installs a regulatory tier, neutral, data-based, and auditable. All discretionary spending above the review threshold must pass through structural validation." I turned a page in my folder, revealing the summary. "The authority won't be inherited, it will be earned. Monthly." Taiwoon's voice cut in. "So that's it. You install yourself as permanent gatekeeper?" I looked at him. Not with anger, not with triumph. With precedent, I said, not power. A pause. Then Director O asked, "Do you have justification?" I nodded once. From the folder beside me, I retrieved the final audit packet. Red seal, timestamped at 8:03 that morning. I slid it across the table. Ji-woon caught it on instinct. His name was on the cover. Inside, page after page documented the last year's financial decisions under his former control. Projects shelved without ROI, vendor relationships that lacked contracts, personal expenditures under vague descriptors like development and strategic goodwill. At the end, spreadsheet tab unauthorized transfers Y1. His eyes scanned the pages. Slowly, then faster, and then stopped moving altogether. "I was building leverage," he murmured, voice low, "not wasting it." "You were spending belief like it was credit," I said, voice even, "and you ran out." He didn't slam the folder shut. He set it down carefully, fingers lingering on the edge for a moment, like he still wanted to argue with the paper. "But data doesn't blink. It doesn't flinch. It's not about punishing you," I continued. "It's about stopping the version of you who never thought anyone would question him." The boardroom was silent. No defense came. And only the sound of the legal advisor stamping the first approval form. One by one, the trustees added their signatures. The charter was passed. After the meeting, I stood beside the window, watching as the sun pulled long shadows across the city. A reflection shimmered in the glass behind me, Ji-woon lingering by the doorway, hands in his pockets. "I read the clause this time," he said quietly. I didn't turn. "You buried a lot inside that folder." "I didn't bury anything," I replied. "I reported." A pause. "Are you ever going to stop?" he asked, watching me. I let the question hang there. Then I looked up at the skyline, at the cranes building things that would outlast all of us. "I'm not watching you anymore," I said. He waited, as if expecting something else. A wound? An offer? I gave him neither. And when I finally turned, he was gone. Back at my desk, the screen blinked again. Authority holder M. Soo-hyun. Review cycle, monthly. Charter ID, 924 Finstable. I didn't smile, but I did open the spreadsheet. Line by line, the system had recalculated. And this time, I didn't need anyone's permission to read it. The office on the second floor doesn't overlook the skyline. It doesn't need to. The window here frames the interior courtyard, quiet, enclosed, where sunlight filters through glass ceilings and lands across clean stone tiles. The world doesn't press its face against these windows. That's why I chose it. The desk is smaller than the one upstairs. There are no trophies on the shelves, no framed certificates lining the walls. The only things here are deliberate. A single plant, small and thriving. A brushed steel terminal, a cup of black tea, steam rising in a steady curl. And the blank frame to my left, never filled, never forgotten. I don't need reminders. The terminal chimes once. Not urgent, not demanding, just a pulse. Monthly trust access controlled by M. Soo-hyun. The words appear like a signature now. Not a headline, not a disruption, a fact. I sit straighter, exhale once, and begin to scroll. Transfers flow with predictable rhythm. Clean, labeled, complete. No hidden vendors, no shell recipients, no one's name circled in red. For once, the system breathes with ease. This is what peace feels like. Not silence, but structure. Outside the office, the glass door muffles the sounds of the floor. Analysts discussing projected dividends, interns muttering nervously over printer malfunctions. Somewhere down the hall, a boardroom empties. Footsteps draw closer. And then pause. I don't look up immediately, but I know it's him. The footsteps resume. Slow, steady, respectful. The door doesn't open. Through the frosted panel, I catch the vague outline of his figure. Even now, he stands like he used to. Weight shifted slightly to one side, hands in pockets, head tilted in thought. A moment passes. Then another, and then he's gone. No knock, no attempt to enter, no last-minute request to undo what was never reversible. He understands now. Back when the charter was signed, I thought he might challenge it, call in favors, leverage the surname we shared, but he didn't. Not once. What came instead was quieter, a series of completed reports, budget memos reviewed and annotated, meetings attended without flourish. His name slowly moved from audit trail to performance chart. Nothing spectacular, just functional. It's the most he's ever resembled a brother. Or maybe he's only now becoming one. I shift my gaze to the bottom right of the terminal. A new report is pending review, quarterly fund integrity summary. I open it with one hand and reach for the tea with the other. The cup is warm, the ceramic smooth against my fingers. I raise it to my lips, taste the gentle bitterness. No sugar, no honey, only clarity. Across the top of the report, a new header gleams. Submitted by Deputy Trustee Han Ji-woon. It's the first time he's ever used that title in writing. I finish reading his summary in silence. It's thorough, is measured, respectful of the new thresholds. He's learning. Maybe he always had the capacity, but not the need, and people rarely grow from comfort. He thought power was inherited. I learned it had to be built. Slowly, quietly, brick by ledger, breath by refusal. A soft knock comes at the door. This time, it's not him. It's a junior associate from legal, holding a revised document for signature. An addendum to the charter, updating the emergency clause index. He sets it on the desk without a word and leaves. I read the amendment carefully, then sign. And So-hyun. Title, Permanent Oversight Chair, Family Trust Governance. The pen glides easily across the paper, no shaking, no second thought. I return to the terminal. Across the dashboard, the flow remains constant. Line by line, each transfer accounts for itself. This is the ending no one clapped for. No dramatic confrontation, no confession in the rain. And yet, it's the only kind of victory I ever wanted. From my seat, I glance once more at the empty photo frame. There are no childhood pictures inside it. Not of me, not of him, not of the family that once praised my silence like it was purity. I left it blank on purpose. Because this office doesn't carry legacy. It carries proof that it didn't need to be loud to matter, that I didn't need to win to be irreversible, and that he, for all his certainty, can walk away from a door like this and know who sits behind it. I tilt the frame slightly so the reflection of the terminal flickers against the glass, and in that flicker, I see a version of myself I no longer chase. They don't have to see me. They just need to know it's not theirs anymore.